speaking to people that have worked on standards investigations in the past, there is definitely a consensus building that he may well find that Nigel Farage has broken the code of conduct, and that will then perhaps trigger a suspension that may even lead to a by-election in Clacton. So the repercussions of this are potentially quite serious for Nigel Farage.
Right, and speaking of which, we will kick off with that story. So this is a big Sunday Times story. It's the Insight team, which is the big investigations unit at the Sunday Times. They carry out a lot of in-depth work, a lot of painstaking work. They spend a lot of time digging in to politicians. They particularly look at sort of funding issues and corruption issues, and they have revealed that Reform UK's leader Nigel Farage has been secretly funded by a convicted criminal and crypto gambler who's become one of his closest advisors. This person's name is George Cottrell, otherwise known as Posh George. Now, he's got no official role in Reform UK, but he has been Nigel Farage's closest advisor for more than a decade and travels with him in Westminster and across the country. Now, the investigation reveals that Nigel Farage did not declare benefits, including staff, security and housing, that were provided by Posh George Cottrell. And speaking to the BBC's Laura Kuenssberg this morning, Robert Jenrick, who's a former Conservative cabinet minister, he of course went for the leadership. He lost out to Kemi Badenoch. He is now a Reform MP and their Treasury spokesperson. He dismissed the claims.
George Cottrell is an old friend of Nigel Farage's. He did give support to Nigel before he was a Member of Parliament. He hasn't done so since he became a Member of Parliament. Mm-hmm. No rules have been broken whatsoever.
Did Nigel Farage stay in that townhouse that's being rented by George Cottrell?
I believe Nigel has said that he stayed a couple of times there, very infrequently, as you're allowed to. I mean, Nigel Farage is allowed to have friends. Mm-hmm. As a politician, you're allowed to stay at a friend's house. And certainly remember, Nigel was not an elected politician. He was, if you like, an ex-politician at the time.
There are two very important facts, though. During this period in 2024, Nigel Farage was the honorary president of Reform UK. He was still a very big political figure.
Well, he wasn't a member of Parliament.
And the rules about say very clearly that people who become MPs should declare things that were registered, any benefits to them in the 12 months before their election. Well, that's the rule. That is the rule.
You have omitted the second half of the rule, which is that you don't have to declare things where they're purely personal. And the allegation, if you like, that you've put to me is that Nigel Farage, maybe a couple of times, I don't know precisely, stayed in the home of a personal friend.
And does he still stay there?
So by definition, that does not fall within the rules.
Does he still stay there?
Not as far as I'm aware, but I don't know. You're allowed to stay at the home of a personal friend.
That was Robert Jenrick speaking with Laura Kuenssberg this morning. Well, joining me now is Kat Neilan, Whitehall editor of The Observer. Hello, Kat.
Hi, Ayesha.
And I think we've also got Christine Jardine, who's the Liberal Democrat MP. Hello, Christine.
Good afternoon. Hi.
Good afternoon. Kat, I'm going to start with you. How serious is this story?
Well, it kind of comes off the back of the other story, which Nigel Farage is currently undergoing an investigation for at the minute over this question of the undeclared £5 million that he was given by Christopher Harborne. And I think the two together will really sort of dovetail because although as Robert Jenrick there was trying to talk about some mitigating circumstances and accusing Laura Kuenssberg of having omitted a part of the rule, he himself omitted another part of the rule, which is that the personal gifts that don't have to be declared are restricted to close family and friends. This is, when you're talking about maybe being given a present by a relative or something, it is not talking about things that are explicitly kind of helping you in your endeavours as a politician. And I think in both the Christopher Harborne issue and with the Posh George Cottrell issue, I think that the Standards Commissioner is going to certainly have some time to want to look at this. And certainly it seems as though, from speaking to people that have worked on standards investigations in the past, there is definitely a consensus building that he may well find that Nigel Farage has broken the code of conduct, and that will then perhaps trigger a suspension that may even lead to a by-election in Clacton. So the repercussions of this are potentially quite serious for Nigel Farage. Now, clearly, he believes he's done nothing wrong. That's been the line now for several weeks. But you can see in the fact that he has sort of gone from giving press conferences on an almost weekly basis, if not more, to really just doing sort of Twitter videos and doing occasional bits to camera, until very recently kind of dropping off the media radar quite a lot, that perhaps he doesn't quite feel as confident in front of journalists as he did a few weeks back.
And so this is separate from the Christopher Harbone donation, and there is already an investigation going on into that. Do we know when that's likely to conclude, Kat?
We don't. The Standards Commissioner, Daniel Greenberg, is very, very scrupulously independent, and MPs are sort of recognised that actually even them asking for details around when he might publish his findings could be viewed as interfering with the process. But I think probably there is certainly a hope that the findings would be published this side of recess, which is really only a couple more weeks. This new investigation, assuming that he takes it on, it's obviously only been referred to him today in response to the article, would take a lot longer for him to come to a conclusion on, assuming he takes it up.
Christine, let's bring you in. I mean, the Liberal Democrats are pushing quite hard on this. You're saying that there should be another investigation, parliamentary investigation, into this new information emerging about George Cotterill. Is that right?
It is, yes. And I think, the questions are beginning to pile up now. There's the original gift, there's the selling of the gold bullion, and now there's this. And I think what we have to remember is that all MPs, we're public figures. The taxpayers have a right to know what's going on. So while Robert Jenrick might say that this is a private matter, very little that we do, that money that changes hands, is a private matter. The public has a right to know. Transparency seems to be a word, however, that Nigel Farage is not familiar with, or at least doesn't believe applies to him. I think we need to know, and if he has done nothing wrong, then the Standards Commissioner will say that. So we will find out.
And look, I mean, Christine, there'll be some people saying, and I've heard, obviously it's a big story today, it's dominating a lot of the news agenda. I've heard some people who are supporters of reform saying, oh, this is everybody just ganging up on reform because they don't like them and they're doing really well in the polls, and actually this isn't going to stop us. This kind of smearing is not going to stop us voting for reform. They're all saying that this is sort of political dirty tricks against reform because they're doing well. What would you say to that?
Well, I kind of expected that to be part of the defence. But the thing is, if you're a member of Parliament, then you are open to scrutiny. You have to be transparent about all your financial dealings. And the same rules apply to Nigel Farage as to anybody else. And he's not being picked on. He's not being ganged up on. He's simply being asked to check that he has followed the rules, and the Standards Commissioner is looking into whether or not he has. Now, if he has followed the rules, then he has nothing to worry about. But it does, you do have to pass on a lot of things. Robert Jenrick was saying today, they're gifts and all the rest of it. But one of the important things about the code and reporting things is that you're asked to bear in mind the perception of what people might think about that gift. And that's the other aspect of this. It begins to raise questions about where is Nigel Farage's loyalty in politics? Who is, is he being controlled? Is he listening to certain people with, and that's what's behind all these donations. We need to know, and nobody's picking on Nigel Farage. He's just been asked to meet the same standards as everybody else.
And Kat, just coming back to you, just remind us of the story that the Labour Party had a big scandal about when they first came into office about not declaring gifts from Lord Ali and others. Just talk us through that again.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is interesting. Obviously, what Christine is talking about fundamentally is that it will come down to the voters to decide. Once you have everything out in the open, that's the point, is that if everyone knows what has been given, then people can make their minds up as to whether or not they think that is appropriate for their elected representative. Keir Starmer and some of the other senior Labour people got into trouble right at the start of their time in government for, in Keir Starmer's case, having free glasses and suits. I think his wife had a couple of dresses. Then there was a lot of MPs who took freebie tickets to see Taylor Swift and other people in concert. And there was a lot of anger about that, because Labour had campaigned as a sort of new approach to politics. They were going to clean politics up, and they were going to be different to the Tories, who by this point people were sick of because they felt that there was a lot of fingers in pies. That's why that story mattered so much. But in hindsight now, of course, the sums, or even at the time, the sums were not huge. It was a few thousand here or there, which obviously for most people is a lot, but compared to 5 million is absolutely nothing. However, that being said, I went to Clacton, Nigel Farage's constituency, a couple of weeks ago to see whether the people there had a particular view. Should it get to the by-election stage? How sort of solid was his support? And of the people I spoke to, many hadn't even heard the story. When I explained it to them, they felt a lot of people talked about the Starmer glasses gate, and compared the two. So in their minds, they feel that politicians are on the take. That's one of the things that people said to me. And it sort of then comes back to, well, who do you see as the sort of least worst option? And then when you get to that point, I think actually there was still a fair number of people in Clacton who were feeling, on balance, they probably would still back Nigel Farage. Now, with this latest story and more information about the 5 million, of course, Nigel Farage recently did a series of interviews with the BBC, Times Radio, LBC, and so on, that may have pushed that issue a bit further up the agenda and into people's minds a bit more. The more it kind of cuts through, the more people might start to feel that, hang on, I'm not so comfortable with this guy taking this much money. There's also a sense that maybe he's not so different to the politicians that they were kind of using him as their protest vote for.
And I'm just reading a report in the Times today. I mean, he has, as you say, he did a lot of interviews a couple of weeks ago, quite a tough round of interviews, got quite a hard time from people. He was quite punchy, as of course is his right and his style, saying I can spend that money on whatever I want. If it's on Ferraris, whatever, it's none of your business. I can do. He said I will probably spend it on security. He has also, and this guy Christopher Harborne is a crypto billionaire, and it's also reported that Nigel Farage met with the Bank of England to argue against state involvement in the sector, and his party Reformer published a draft piece of legislation called the Crypto Assets and Digital Finance Bill, which says will make the UK the world's premier hub for cryptocurrency. So it does look like he is lobbying quite hard in favour of cryptocurrency, and he has taken £5 million from somebody who is a real leader in cryptocurrency.
And that last story that you mentioned there is also possibly going to be the subject of a standards investigation, because another MP has referred it to the Standards Commissioner. As I understand it, and we reported today, the Commissioner has not yet made a determination and has asked for further evidence. Reform seem to think that it's a closed case, but I don't think it is. And I think perhaps after the revelations from today, there will be a lot more pressure on the Standards Commissioner to really kind of get to grips with what is going on. And it's also just noteworthy that whilst this is happening, you also have a piece of legislation about to return to the Commons for its sort of final stages, the Representation of the People's Bill, sometimes also called the Elections Bill, which is designed to clarify some points where things maybe have become a bit less straightforward, but also to sort of reinforce things around crypto donations, around overseas donors, and so on. So at the same time that you have all of the sort of revelations about Nigel Farage and other members of Reform and what they may or may not have done, you've also got legislative moves afoot to try and strengthen the system that we do have.
Yes, absolutely. Christine, I'm just going to put a question to you. This is from one of a very cross listener, David. If you're anti-Farage, this is the biggest story ever, and Farage should be hung, drawn and quartered. If you're pro-Farage, this is the usual MSM muckraking and a storm in a Westminster bubble teacup. And I listen to Times Radio all day. This story's been rehashed on every programme, and I'm now heartily sick of it. You've managed to make me not care one jot about Farage's antics, and even consider listening to Radio 4, which means this David's furious. I mean, if he's thinking of tuning into Radio 4, S just got real. What would you say to David, Christine? He's saying this is a load of nonsense. You all just don't like Farage. Stay away from him.
Well, I didn't look for this story. None of us, well, journalists, of course, looked for this story and found it. But we didn't create this story. This is what Nigel Farage has done. And like the rest of us who are elected representatives, we are answerable to the public. Now, as Kat said, if the public don't see a problem with it and he hasn't broken any of the rules, there won't be an issue, and the story will die. But if he has broken the rules and he has taken money and then lobbied on behalf of someone that he shouldn't have done, then he has to answer for it like everybody else. And I'm sorry if it's interfering with listeners' sort of viewing habits, but unfortunately I think it is quite important that the public knows what the politicians are doing and that they have faith that we are not taking money and asking questions. It goes right back to the Cash for Questions. And it's about, as you years ago.
And it's about transparency, isn't it? I mean, it's the same way that when Labour first got into power, I mean, lots of Labour people were very cross with newspapers and this newspaper and this radio station. Many of my colleagues were like, why are you talking about this story about the freebies with Labour? It's a non-story. You're just being mean to the Labour Party. So it's interesting how people do pick their sort of biases in terms of who it's acceptable to go after. But the whole point is, if you are a politician and you get money, you're meant to declare it. So as you say, the public, you at home, you can make a judgment. You might be absolutely fine with it. You might think he who pays the piper picks the tune. You might have that view. So it's all about sort of transparency. Well, look, Kat and Christine, thanks very much for your time. It's a big story, so it's good to get you on about that.